to the Oakville Public Library's community conversation on supporting global human rights towards the LGBTQI community in the Ukraine. My name is Marcus Logan. I'm the manager of community development and engagement for the Oakville Public Library. And the Oakville Public Library, I'd like to acknowledge that we are situated on territory or treaty number 14 and 22 of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. Oakville is currently home to many different First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So regardless of where we come from, we are all interconnected through the land that we live on, the water that we use, and the air that we breathe. We at Oakville Public Library are committed to a continuous learning journey in allyship. We seek to elevate Indigenous voices and lived experience to cultivate reconciliation in Oakville. So the Community Conversations is a series of 8 months of different social and political topics that the Oakville Public Library wants to elevate conversations on. And so today, in June, we are celebrating Pride Month, and so we are here really pleased. Personal friends of mine have agreed to do this tonight, and so we really want to have these conversations at the Oakville Public Library, where we are elevating social justice around different issues. Today, we're focused on the queer and trans community. So we always try to invite our politicians or our local folks to come out for these special events. And I have 2 letters that were sent to me one from Pam Damoff, our Oakville North Burlington MP. And Pam sends thanks for inviting me to this discussion. I regret that I'm unable to join you for this special event. I am in Ottawa this week at the House of Commons is in session. I appreciate your advocacy, and I am a proud ally to the 2SLGBTQIA+ community, regardless whether you live in Canada or around the world. Thank you for providing a safe space for this conversation to take place. I fully support your hard work and am committed to being a part of the solution. Thank you so much to Marcus, Doug, Michelle, Andrii, and Lenny for leading this important discussion and your advocacy in our community. I look forward to hearing about tonight's discussions. As well, our Member of Parliament for Oakville, Anita Anand, has sent some welcomes. And Anita says, thank you so much for coming here tonight to help put a spotlight on some of the most vulnerable victims of the war in Ukraine. I want to thank Doug and the Oakville Public Library for putting on this event together. Further, I would like to recognize the momentous activism and important insights of Michelle, Andrii, and Lenny. And additionally, I'd like to express my appreciation for the critical work that Lenny and KyivPride are doing on the ground in Ukraine to support LGBTQI+ victims of Putin's horrid invasion. During times of war, too often are the most marginal people in society left out of the discussion. Well, unfortunately, I'm unable to attend tonight due to my international travel commitments. I wish you all the best in this important conversation about how we live here in Halton, we who live here in Halton can support members of the LGBTQI community in the Ukraine. To date, our government has allocated $6 million to the UNHCR as part of our relief efforts, which will help support LGBTQIA+ refugees and asylum seekers. Our steadfast commitment to supporting people of Ukraine must extend in supporting its LGBTQI community. I look forward to hearing some of the ways that we can help here in Halton and assist organizations like KyivPride in their efforts. This event may be occurring during Pride Month, but it is vital that these efforts and conversations do not end here. And that is from our Member of Parliament for Oakville, Anita Anand. So I'm going to turn tonight's conversation over to a dear friend of mine, Doug Kerr, and Doug will lead us through some conversations. So welcome, Doug.
Great. Thank you very much, Marcus. Good evening, everybody, and happy Pride, Oakville. Happy Pride to everybody in the audience and everybody watching online. I'm really happy to be here today. My name is Doug Kerr. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of Dignity Network Canada, which is a national coalition of over 54 now organizations that are Canadian organizations that are involved in and interested in the human rights of people based on sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, sex characteristics, so LGBTIQ communities around the world. And we're really happy to, I'm really happy here to be moderating this important conversation because the issues affecting the LGBTI communities in Ukraine are very important to us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests that are going to be speaking to you tonight. The first is Michelle Emson, and Michelle is an international human rights activist and advocate specializing in transgender rights, LGBTIQ, 2S, diversity, inclusion, and mental health. She's an award-winning public speaker. As you'll soon find out, she's amazing. She's been delivering workshops and talks since 2012 to clients in education, healthcare, corporate, policing, government, all over Canada and internationally. She is currently Digital Director for Women March Global. She's on the steering committee of the North Simcoe Muskoka Trans Health Service and on the board of the YWCA Muskoka. And she was on the steering committee, founding steering committee for Dignity Network Canada. So I'm very proud to have worked with her. She's an author, entrepreneur, documentary filmmaker, and she's received the YWCA Women of Distinction Award for all of this work. So welcome, Michelle. Next to Michelle is Andrii Zarytskyi, and Andrii is a department manager of an LGBTQ organization in Ukraine called LIGA, which has a long history of working in a civic space and social organization sector in Ukraine. His background is in translation, human rights, and business English. So we're really honored to have him here tonight. Andrii arrived actually in Canada just about a month ago with his family, and he's now been here for a few weeks, and a good time to come in the spring, and it's got summer now, so welcome, Andrii. And he has been working in partnership with one of our members, EGAL Canada, which has some partnership work in Ukraine, so I'm sure he'll talk a bit about that. So without further ado, our program tonight will be, I'll ask each of them to sort of give a bit of a talk about their work, and we're going to also see a video and hear from Lenny Emson, who's actually in Ukraine right now, which would be really fabulous and I think important, and Michelle will tell you more about the story. I'll ask Andrii to talk a little bit about his work, and then we'll just have a few questions in the conversation. Sound good? All right, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle, who will be telling us a story, a very interesting and important story about, well, you'll see it's quite fascinating.
Thank you so much, Doug, and thank you, Marcus and Oakville Public Library, for hosting us this evening. Because we have Lenny, albeit on video, because it's quite late in Ukraine this time of the evening, and because we have Andrii, I figured, why don't I give you a little bit of a history of the LGBT, or the relationship between the LGBT community in Ukraine and here in Canada, because actually it's very recent. So it started actually in 2014. In 2014, Toronto very proudly hosted World Pride. And at the helm, Mr. Doug Kerr here hosted the World Pride Human Rights Conference. A number of Canadian Ukrainians from right here in Oakville, actually, Catherine and John Valinga, had become aware of the situation in Ukraine back in 2012. So in 2012, a number of LGBT activists in Kyiv attempted to hold the first March of Equality in downtown Kyiv. And this was in response to potential upcoming anti-gay propaganda legislation. At that time, the president was Yanukovych, a Russian sympathizer and certainly connected in Russian influence. And Russia previously had already enacted this law of anti-gay propaganda, and there was a serious risk that this was going to happen in Ukraine. And so a number of activists decided to rally around this and hold a KyivPride. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And it didn't happen because thousands of protesters were bussed into the city in a very organized counter demonstration, which just overpowered the organizers. They just weren't prepared for such a kickback. And so that 2012 experienced certain violence. A number of the organizers were unfortunately assaulted. And despite those assaults being caught on video and on photography, to this date, no charges have ever been laid for those assaults. So 2012 was cancelled. In 2013, 100 marchers were allowed, because that was the maximum number specified by the police, to march just 300 meters, surrounded by 1,500 riot police. So just imagine those numbers for a minute. 100 marchers surrounded by 1,500 riot police to keep the violent protesters back from the marches. But nevertheless, it happened, and it was a historic event. And this caught the attention of John and Catherine Valinga, who, when Toronto announced that it was hosting World Pride and the World Pride Human Rights Conference, and oh my goodness, Catherine Valinga is here in the audience this evening. That's terrific. Sponsored 4 activists to travel from Ukraine to that conference and represent Ukraine for the first time in a World Pride Human Rights Conference. And this is a photograph here of many of the marchers that also took part in the World Pride parade, I think along with around 30,000 other marchers. But for the first time, we had a Ukrainian contingent, and it wouldn't be for the last time either. And here we can see, even back then, this is 2014, so this was after Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity. This was after Yanukovych had fled the country. And this was still at a time when we were very much against the anti-gay propaganda and certainly against having that law enacted in Ukraine. So how did this all come about, and how did I meet, and how did I get involved? Well, this is the beauty of it. Not only did John and Catherine bring those 4 people across, they reached out to me through a connection of a connection to video the visit. And the idea initially was just to document the experience of those 4 activists coming to Toronto and participating in World Pride and in the Human Rights Conference. However, 2 of us, Lenny, who you'll hear from shortly, and myself, decided to take it one stage further, and we created a documentary film called Pride of Ukraine. It is available on YouTube. You can just search for film Pride of Ukraine and you should be able to find it. And this film tells the story of KyivPride, how it came to be, and how important international support was and continues to be for the Pride movement and for LGBT rights in Ukraine. Part of that is because in 2013, the only reason that there were 1,500 riot police in attendance for these 100 marches was because of the international delegates. We had members of the European Parliament, we had the mayor of Munich attending, and other dignitaries. And it was behoven upon the police to protect those dignitaries, much less protect the marchers themselves. So you can see here just the contribution of presence can make a huge difference in activism work. And so these are the 4 in Loblaws in downtown Toronto. You might recognize that. And we're going to hear from Lenny, who's on the right-hand side there, in just a few minutes. In 2015, we were back. We flew Lenny back in. We couldn't bring everybody across, but nevertheless, we had a great contingent. And just like in 2014, what was interesting was that 60% of the marchers that marched with us behind the KyivPride banner did not identify as LGBTQI. They were allies to the Ukrainian LGBT community. And allies just play such a huge role It just can't be understated. That same year in 2015, KyivPride were Grand Marshals in Montreal for the huge Montreal Pride. So this was a huge moment. And remember, this is only 1 year after the first time we had welcomed Ukrainian LGBT activists here into Canada. In 2016, we teamed up with Amnesty International. And you can see that this was the start, if we see Lenny's poster there, of the work going on in Ukraine to address hate crimes that were being aimed towards the LGBTQ community. There were a number of violent assaults, very serious ones, against the LGBT community, not only activists, but just the community at large. LIGA itself has numerous times had community centers vandalized. And so there's a lot of work to do here as well. Lenny here teaming up with Danielle Bubno, I think, yeah, from Toronto Police Service, I'm sorry. And again, bringing hate crimes to the attention, but also understanding how Toronto Police were dealing with marginalized community hate crimes. Just last fall, we toured some 7 or 8 cities in Ukraine, presenting to regional police forces, again, around the issue of hate crimes towards LGBT community. So here we're raising awareness within the police service of gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. And so raising that education, raising that awareness, part of the police reforms going on in Ukraine, but very specifically around addressing hate crimes so that we can tackle those. This is a fundraiser, which I'll talk to a little bit later on. But this was taken during March of this year, where we, just in Muskoka, had a very targeted fundraiser to raise money for KyivPride and the work that they were doing in Ukraine during the war. All right, so how did we get to where we are today? In February of this year, Lenny and I celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary. Thank you, it's very kind. So, Doug, you have a lot to answer for. Out of the World Pride Human Rights Conference and out of Catherine Valinga and John Valinga's generosity in bringing those activists to Ukraine, Lenny and I met, and we've been together ever since World Pride. So in February, we were delighted to have our wedding anniversary. However, that was somewhat undershadowed by Putin amassing forces to the east and the south and the movement of troops in Belarus. But even at that point, we didn't, and I don't think anybody else really believed he was going to do it. But it would be just a few weeks later, on the evening of February 23rd here, and the morning of February 24th in Ukraine, that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine for not the first time, remembering that he did so in Crimea and in Donbass back in 2014. Within 1 week, Lenny was on a plane back to Ukraine. And that was the beginning of a very hard time for both of us, but it was an absolutely necessary and important trip to make, because returning to Kyiv, to his community, making sure that there was psychological support, that there was housing and accommodation support, opening not 1 but 2 shelters, providing food and important medication to the LGBT community in Kyiv, and helping work with other activists doing the same thing right across the country. And we're going to hear from Lenny in just a moment. So you can see how in an instant lives can change, sometimes for the better and sometimes not so much. So I think that's just a potted history. I think what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Lenny. Because Lenny's in Ukraine, we recorded this video yesterday, and Lenny's going to give you directly an update from Kyiv as to what's going on there with KyivPride and the community in Ukraine.
Hi everyone, my name is Lenny Emson. I'm the Executive Director of KyivPride, the biggest pride organization in Ukraine, and I'm as well a co-chair of the LGBT Association LIGA in Ukraine. Well, I've been involved in the Ukrainian LGBTQI movement for many years right now, so our movement is over 30 years old. We started our way back in 1991 when the homosexuality was decriminalized in Ukraine. In 1993, first initiative group in Mykolaiv city was created, and in 1996, first LGBT organization was registered in Ukraine. Since that time, we did not stop our efforts to make life for LGBTQI individuals in Ukraine better. Right. We started KyivPride back in 2012 when, as a group of 15 activists, we decided to protest against those members of parliament who wanted to introduce the gay propaganda law, so-called, in Ukraine, and just copy this law that was already in action in Russia, and to implement this practice in Ukraine as well, and to ban us from actually existing in our country. So that's how the march started, and exactly in 2012 we couldn't protest because of the huge backlash from right radical organizations, right radicals who were there ready to beat us up, ready to stop us, and the police would not take any action to protect us. 9 years after, in 2021, we were 7,000 people marching together, and police was marching with us, protecting us from 250 protesters. This is a huge shift, and we did it within 9 years. And this year, in 2022, we turned 10 years old. And this year, unfortunately, because of the Russian aggression in our country, we cannot celebrate. We cannot be out and loud on the streets of our city, Kyiv City. So this year, Warsaw Pride is welcoming us on the streets of Warsaw, the capital of Poland, to help us to march for peace, to march for Ukraine, and to dedicate our birthday to the peace in Ukraine. We have a lot of supporters that would march for us or march with us. So Riga Pride is marching with us, Cologne, Berlin, other prides in Europe, prides in Canada, prides in the US. Many pride organizations reached out to us and offered to march for us, as we cannot do it in Kyiv, in Odessa, in Kharkiv, in Kryvyi Rih, in all pride cities of Ukraine. Unfortunately, this year we would not be able to march. So we're so grateful to our brothers, sisters, non-binary siblings from many countries who are marching for us. So KyivPride is a human rights organization. We do a lot of advocacy. We advocate for LGBTQI rights. We work with businesses, with politicians, with other allies of LGBTQI movement to make the situation with LGBTQI rights and life for LGBTQI people better in Ukraine. When the invasion started, when Russia brutally attacked Ukraine, we absolutely changed and reorganized all the work that we're doing. And we dedicated all the efforts to the direct help for the community. We started helping people, as many of them lost their jobs in one day, as many of them found themselves on the edge of surviving after February 24th. So we started provide help to people who needed food, who needed medications, who needed relocation for internally displaced people, for those who want to flee abroad, for those who need to find a shelter. And we provided help to all these people. So since the invasion started, we already helped around 1,000 people with all sorts of help, including psychological support, including monetary support. And we provide a shelter. Right now, we are organizing a big, nice shelter for LGBTQI people in Ukraine. Before, we were hosting people temporarily in the facilities that we had in hand, but right now we opened a shelter in the community center for those who need right now accommodation, who need rest, who need food, and who need support in the middle of the war. So since the invasion started, we received a lot of calls, a lot of messages from the members of the community, from LGBTQI organizations from all over the world, Canada and the US and Europe. And people were asking us, what do we need, how they can help. We've got donations from private persons, we've got donations from LGBTQI organizations that wanted to help. We've got humanitarian aid from our Pride organizations in Europe. We've got help from all the civil society members. So this is the very nice feeling when you feel that there is a community that exists beyond borders, that we all are united and we stand for each other and we help each other. And so many community members were offering their homes to LGBTQI people fleeing abroad in many countries as well, in Europe, in Canada, and we have a big database of those people who are helping LGBTQI refugees from Ukraine. Unlike those organizations, unlike people from the community, the government unfortunately did not do any step to help us and to support us as the community, as a social group. And we do not expect it, right? As a social group, LGBTQI people in Ukraine, we just traditionally being left behind, being left alone in everything that we are coming through right now. LGBTQI community in Ukraine is very diverse, and of course, as members of society, we are having different views, we have different attitudes. There are people who are fleeing abroad because they want to find a safe place, somewhere where there is no war. They are traumatized by the war, they're traumatized by bombs falling and missiles shelling their cities, so they need a safe space abroad. There are people who want to stay in the country and help their country to win this war. There are people who work as volunteers, helping communities to survive this very difficult time. And there are people in the LGBTQI community who voluntarily served in the military, and right now they're fighting in Ukrainian army for Ukrainian freedom. There are members of queer community and gay people and trans people who are fighting for our freedom with weapons in their hands. And we're very proud of them. And we are helping them with everything that we have. So we providing supplies for them. We're helping them with as well food and medications and some supplies that they might need at the moment. So we support them with all our hearts and with all means that we have in hand. So yes, it's been 100 days, and right now what the community needs, community still needs to survive. So we still need from the world to pay attention, to stand up for Ukraine and to help Ukraine to win this war. So actually what Russia does, Russia denies us our basic human rights, the right for life, the right for security, the right for freedom. So we right now need a lot of help from the international community to survive in this war, and first of all, to help us to stay alive within this period. So 100 days and the world is being a little bit tired of this war, right? People getting used to it. But unfortunately, we cannot relax and get used to it. Say, this morning, Kyiv was shelled. Few people died, unfortunately. Some infrastructure was ruined and destroyed. So every day, every night, we have air raid alerts, and we do not know which house will be the next, who will be the next. So what we need right now is to survive, first of all. And as a community, we need to stay united, and we need to provide help to those who are the most vulnerable members of our community, of our queer crowd in Ukraine. And that is what we're doing right now. We're providing a shelter, we're providing help, we're providing everything to keep people going and to help them to stay alive, safe, and to support their well-being in the middle of the war. We need not to forget that under the martial law, people with gender marker M, so male, in their passports, they are not allowed to leave the country if they are aged between 18 and 60. So, if you can imagine, the majority of LGBTQI community stays in the country, and these people need help. They lost their jobs, they lost their families, they lost their homes. And right now, what we need to do is to be united, to support them all, and to give them a helping hand that will guide them through these times. I'm personally convinced that without the support that civil society gave Ukraine, the governments, the politicians would never change their mind. So civil society, international community is the engine of Stand for Ukraine movement, and we need to keep going all together, and we need to stand for our country, and we need all together to continue to push on the governments to provide help for Ukraine and to provide support for Ukraine. And of course, we need to push on the governments, so make them really taking care of the most vulnerable communities. And LGBT community is one of them. We are traditionally marginalized. We are traditionally discriminated. Right now, the level of hate crimes towards LGBTQI people in Ukraine is rising up. And we, as the community, we are as visibly non-heteronormative people, we are under attack. Unfortunately, right now, on one hand, we have Russian invasion, we have Russian soldiers killing our people, threatening our people. When Russia occupies territories, Russia hunts down LGBTQI and other human rights activists. And we do not know right now what is happening with them on the occupied territories. On the other hand, we have all these homophobic, transphobic forces that right now, using these times in trying to oppress the community. They're beating our people up, they're harassing them, they're humiliating them, they're bullying them. And unfortunately, police is too busy with the war, and they cannot dedicate all their power to protect us. And right now, we're trying to find a way out of this situation. And we as the community, being double discriminated and being actually under double threat right now. We need to intensify the help that we can receive. So we need to intensify our efforts to help people with humanitarian aid and not to leave the LGBT community behind all the stream of humanitarian aid that's coming in to Ukraine. So we need to support the community with as much humanitarian aid that we can provide for them, because unfortunately the prices are rising up. People are jobless, they cannot find a way to secure food, to secure medications. In some regions there is a shortage of water, and all over Ukraine we experience a shortage of gas. And community members are suffering as the most marginalized population in Ukraine. First of all, thank you for being here today, and thank you for supporting Ukraine. What we need to remember, that the war is not over. What we need to remember, that our fight is still going. What we need to remember, that without your help, without international community's help, Ukraine and Ukrainian LGBTQI community will not be able to survive as such. Right now we need more visibility. Right now we need more international attention. We need to be visible as the community that fights for Ukraine. We need to be visible as the community that needs help right now. We ask you to stand up for Ukraine. Please do not give up. We're not giving up, and we ask you to stand up with us and to fight for our country, fight for our lives. We need to win this war. If Ukraine will not celebrate the victory, then LGBT community in the country is absolutely dead. I would like you to remember this, because in order to be alive as a community, we need to be, first of all, alive in our country, in the country that respects human rights, unlike Russia, that never did and never will be respecting the basic human rights for all people, including LGBT. So I want to thank international community for your help and support. Every dollar you send, every message you send, every word of kindness and support means a lot for us. This is what helps us to stay alive, and this is what helps us to go further and not to stop. And we feel that we're not alone in this world. We feel supported. We feel that you are covering our back. This is very important, and this feeling is very helpful. I want to thank you for this, and I want to continue doing what you did for us.
Michelle, thank you again for your story. It's always moving, and I'm always honored to know that I played a small part in that story. I have a number of questions for you, but I'd like to go to Andrii. We'll come back, but I'd like to go to Andrii. Andrii, could you maybe start off and tell us a bit about your story, a little bit about who you are, about your work, and how you ended up here on this stage in Oakville tonight?
Hello. First of all, thanks for coming, and thanks for the warm words of welcome, and thanks for hosting the event, Marcus. I came, as you said, Doug, I came in May, early May, from Ukraine, and I'm an LGBTQ activist since the autumn of 2007. That was the same year I was involved with LGBT Association LIGA, and I can tell you that the organization has been through so many different things. Like, for instance, the assault on the board member of the organization back in 2006 when LIGA opened its first LGBTQ community center in Mykolaiv, to, like, spreading our experience to other different regions. I mean, LIGA, as Lenny and Michelle have already mentioned, LIGA has been registered back in 1996. So it's making this organization one of the oldest LGBTQ organizations in Ukraine. And in 2014, LIGA opened 3 different offices, one in Kherson, one in Mykolaiv, one in Kherson, Odessa, and in Kyiv, because Mykolaiv is where the head office is situated. And our organization has been, like, through many different things. We work in lobbying advocacy. We provide different health services to LGBTQ community in Ukraine. I mean, primarily we work on the south of Ukraine, and we shifted also to Kyiv and Oblast back in 2015 because we started working with the LGBT adolescents, because this is one of the marginalized LGBTQ groups too, which needs support, like mostly psychological support, because of the bullying and human rights violations and all. So yeah, that's the work which we did before the war, and we've been through many different things. Like we survived different attacks of the opponents of the LGBTQ community for many times. Liga has also organized different Pride events starting in 2009, and actually that was one of Liga's first court cases, which Liga won, because the then local authorities have actually banned the Pride events in Mykolaiv city because they didn't want to see any LGBTQ flags on the streets or something like that. I mean, Liga didn't hold any marches throughout its Pride events, but what we did, we hold public actions, and the first one was in 2008, and in 2009 we actually continued doing that up until the COVID pandemic hit, and even that we survived and we adjusted to that. But what we didn't adjust to and what we still dealing with is the war. I mean, it's like, I remember it's like it just happened when on the 24th of February, my boyfriend called me, his call woke me up at about 5 in the morning, and the words I heard was, "Do you hear the bombing? The war is here." And I mean, at first I didn't actually believe that, because it's insane to think that the war could come in more territories. I mean, it started back in 2014, but I never thought that I would actually experience any of that in modern era, when human rights are supposed to be above everything. So it was still dark, and what I saw first was the flashes, and I heard the noise, and then the glasses in my windows started shaking. And I mean, I didn't believe it back then. I still don't think I fully believe in that the Russians are actually invaded some of the territories. But it was really difficult back then, and I know that many people are still suffering from all the consequences of the bombings and shellings, both physically and mentally. And what Liga is trying to do, and big thanks to many donors who provided funding for that. So the organization provides different kind of supports to the LGBT community, starting with food and medicine, and ending with a shelter. I mean, we wanted to organize a shelter in Odessa because it's relatively a bit safer place for people to stay than Kherson or Mykolaiv, for instance. But we just didn't find a place specific and big enough for to accommodate people there. So what we did, we provide accommodation in cheap hotels or apartments for people to stay in for at least for a month until they try to find some jobs. And that's also the thing that Liga is providing support to the community. So we organize some sort of a crisis center inside our community center where people can use the internet, try to find them jobs, try to make a resume. We also provide some trainings to people to actually help them learn those things. And of course, we provide some support with food and with medicine, because the problem right now is that many different facilities and private entrepreneurs they had to close because of the war, and people have lost their jobs. And even those people who have their jobs, sometimes the money they receive is not enough because the prices, as Lenny has mentioned, have risen up sometimes twice or three times than before the war. And I think the worst thing right now is that we hear news about some of the LGBTQ activists, and of course other people too, have been missing. For instance, in Kherson, which is still occupied by Russians, I know a guy, he's homosexual, who is lost in her son. No one knows where he went. No one knows where he is. There's no means of communicating to him. And I mean, we can assume the worst, but what if our assumptions are actually true and the person is killed? I mean, I understand that many people are killed right now in Ukraine because of the war, but it's also like difficult to hear those news, you know, that the people are missing and you specifically cannot do anything about this. And that's what's devastating. So our organization is trying to help in any way possible, and that's a huge thanks to every supporter of our organization, of KyivPride. And KyivPride is actually one of those organizations LIGA is cooperating with to provide those kind of support to LGBT community. I mean, our organization mostly is focused on the southern part of Ukraine and Kyiv, but we also provide a little bit of support to those other regions like Kharkiv, like Zaporizhia. From more than 1,000 different applications for support, we have provided support to more than 500 people with more than $1 million of Ukrainian hryvnias money, and that's different kind of things. And people are still like requiring that support. So that's like in short what we try to do. And yeah.
Great, thank you. So I have a number of questions where we can kind of go a little bit deeper into some of this and also talk a little bit about how Canadians and people watching this can support and support you and your work and Lenny's work. But maybe I want to maybe understand a little bit more about what was the situation like just before the war. Like, what were LGBTQ activists working on? If you think back to like 6 months ago or a year ago, what were the kinds of things that you were actually moving forward on, right? To help people understand what was a certain, where was the LGBTI movement at in Ukraine? What were the kinds of work that you were doing? And it speaks about what you know about Lenny, or what was LIGA doing as well. Either maybe respond to that. Yeah.
Well, the situation has been different. Like Lenny has mentioned that in 1991, Ukraine was one of the first countries which canceled the discriminatory legislation prohibiting same-sex or homosexual relations between men. But since then, LIGA and KyivPride were trying to improve the situation because, for instance, we had a ban in Ukraine for people who have homosexual sex contacts to donate blood, and that was actually changed due to the work of LGBTQ organizations in Ukraine. In 2011, which Lenny has also mentioned, we have like 3 or 4, even 5 different law bills presented in our parliament, which would prohibit any mention, so to speak, of homosexuality in media, in literature, like public actions, anything. So together with different LGBTQ organizations, we actually helped to those law bills to disappear. So we fought and lobbied for improvement of that situation. The public opinion has also been changing to the better in a couple of years. Many researchers have provided different statistics, and I mean it's slightly, but it was improving. People were more accepting, and I think that was due to the work of both KyivPride and LIGA and other LGBTQ organizations who worked with the society, like different advertisements, different training on tolerance, on human rights and everything. So I think that helped. And what LIGA specifically worked for, as I said before, we were holding different Pride events in Mykolaiv, Kherson, and Odessa. We worked with different embassies, and Canadian Embassy was one of those embassies specifically supportive of our work. And they even organized different meetings with the stakeholders and different allies, to discuss the current situation, what can be improved, what those stakeholders can actually, what support they can give. As Michelle also mentioned, we managed to organize 6 trainings with cooperation with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs in Ukraine for the police officers about LGBTQ people and the tolerance and how to work with them. So right now, Gali is finishing the handbook on those trainings, and that was one of the good things which we managed to do before the war started.
And I think more than that, there was a very successful event. I was lucky enough to be in Ukraine for 3 months last fall, also working on that project. But the exciting part was it was well received, and we were looking forward to extending that project too. I think the other thing is trans rights. We've seen huge advances in the last 8 years or so on trans rights. One primary example is that for trans people, they were required to undergo inpatient psychiatric evaluation for an extended period of time, maybe 30 days, I think it was. So 30 days of inpatient evaluation. So you had to give up your job for a whole month or so to undergo. That's since gone. And then many, many other advances. And I think the other one that I'd really like to mention, because I've had the honor of attending there as well, is the National LGBT Conference that I think had 13th year last year, I think. So 13 years, bringing LGBT organizations from across the country together for a 3-day event. Politicians also. And embassies would attend. Canadian Embassy attended, certainly when I was there, and other embassies too. So terrific events, yeah.
I just want to add, we also worked in Ukraine with different organizations. We worked on amending the current hate crimes legislation to include LGBTQ into it as a ground to protect them from hate crimes, as well as worked on lobbying the civil partnership for the LGBT community, for people to be able to make that, some sort of a marriage between each other so that people could also enjoy that family life together. That's other things we worked before the war.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that there was a space, the democratic space, the space for organizing and moving these issues forward. And I think, for us at Dignity Network, us and our members are working with LGBTQ organizations across the world, and I think it's really important for folks to understand and think about that Ukraine was one of those countries that was moving forward on democracy and civil rights and civil society. And sadly, all over the world, and Ukraine is on the front line of this. But whether it's in other places near the ex-Soviet Union, like Georgia or Armenia, or even further afield, or in parts of Eastern Europe and Hungary, in other parts of Africa and Latin America, there are anti-democratic forces and anti-LGBT and anti-gender equality forces that have been moving forward. And so, in many ways, the fight for LGBTI rights, for human rights in Ukraine is so important, right? It literally is on a front line of something that I think is affecting hundreds of millions of people around the world. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one other thing that really comes to mind right now is, given the current situation, and you will have read of Ukraine's consideration for EU candidacy. Yeah. So a part of that was that the Ukrainian government needed to complete an extremely detailed questionnaire as part of the submission for that candidacy, which included explicitly LGBTQ rights. So it's interesting, again, that reinforces this move forward towards equality around gender identity and expression.
So, Andrii, you were speaking a little bit about the ways, about the impact of the war. I'm wondering if you have any more insights on, very specifically, what are some of the ways that, LGBTQI people are not one monolith. There are many types of folks of different economic classes. There are trans people, gender nonconforming people. I'm just wondering if you could, people with HIV, living with HIV/AIDS, what are some of the ways that the war has actually impacted? Like, what are some specific realities for LGBTQ people, particularly when it comes to the support that they need and humanitarian aid and the kind of help that your organizations are providing? What are some of the needs that people have?
Well, there are, of course, some basic needs which also affect other people, not just LGBTQ. For instance, in Mykolaiv, there's no drinking water because the Russian has actually broken the plumbing, which delivered the drinking water from Dnieper River. So the city is providing the drinking water for free, but what they actually get in their homes is like the water which is not drinkable. So I think it's also affecting everyone, not just LGBT, of course, but everyone. So that's like one of the needs. Then in Kherson, I've read many news and I've heard many people saying that there's a lack of like foods, like vegetables like grain and everything, because the Russians have actually like stolen it from the region. And of course that, as you mentioned already, like HIV people, I mean, they have access to the treatment, to the PrEP and everything, but due to the like fears of different institutions to work, and many still work, there's probably the need to like be safe, and that's like the first thing that people need. And of course there's like psychological support that people require, and Liga has established a hotline, and people, those who call, it's like one of the first needs they express, like psychological support, food and medicine, like shelter, especially to those people who are still staying in Kherson and Mykolaiv regions. They're staying under the bombings and shellings, and they want to get away from that, at least to some safer places. That's also another need they express. And of course, jobs and money. As I said before, many people have lost their jobs and the prices have risen, so that's the thing they need right now. We have many calls, as I said before, for psychological support. People even require a psychotherapy because of what they experience there. It's constantly like all the noise and fears and everything. People are scared for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. So they require like extensive psychotherapy. Some people just even need to just talk, to express their feelings, maybe to cry, to let all of those fears and all of those concerns out. So probably these are the like most of the needs people express when they call or come to our community center in Odessa.
Do you have any insight and knowledge on impacts on trans people and trans men and women in the country?
It's always a challenge. Anyway, I mean, yes, we've seen great advances, but there's still certain social pushback for trans and genderqueer, gender non-binary individuals. Access to hormone therapy, gender-affirming hormone therapy, as an example. The challenges with not having documentation that reflects your gender identity and expression. Lenny kind of alluded to that in one respect, but you know, it's much wider. It's very difficult to make that change. And so for many reasons, there are a lot of trans people that don't have documentation that matches their expression. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm wondering, and maybe this is more for Michelle, and you did talk a little bit about a fundraiser. I'm just wondering, over the last, since the war started, you've been here in Canada, although I know you're going over to Europe soon. Which we can maybe talk about if you'd like. How have Canadians, our government, so both the Canadian government as well as Canadian people, how have they responded, I guess, in general, and more specifically about support for LGBTQ organizations? What do you see as happening, and what have you been doing as an ally in the struggle?
I think the support that I've witnessed and experienced has been quite incredible. But I think there's a high degree of proactivity needed in order to garner that experience and get that support. We saw that in the picture of the fundraiser that I showed a little earlier. That was an impromptu fundraiser that took place, of all places, in Gravenhurst in Muskoka on a drag night. And that one event raised $11,000, which went directly to KyivPride in order to support the LGBT community. It was incredible to rally around and get that kind of contribution from people in such a short amount of time. So we can certainly continue to do that. There's an awful lot that we can do as Canadians to support Ukraine. We can become an integral part of the community. We've got a huge Ukrainian diaspora right here in Canada, but also in Toronto. We can do work around that. Lenny's appeal is a really important one, and that is, please don't forget and don't get tired of this war. Don't forget about Ukraine. We can't afford, as an international community, to let our guard down for 1 minute and to lose sight of the horror that's taking place, completely uncalled for, atrocious horror that's taking place in Ukraine. We need to keep that front and center of our minds.
Absolutely. I mean, there are millions and millions of displaced people, internally displaced people, as well as refugees, and then there are entire cities that have been blown up. Right. I mean, so the war is continued, but you're right. It's not. There's something shifted in terms of, I guess, public consciousness in this country about the war since I would say since March, when it was when Kyiv was being attacked. Right. So I think that's a very good point. I do have some thoughts on this as well. It was interesting, Marcus, when he started the event, he read the letters from member of parliaments, and it was great. It was great to hear member of parliament Pam Damoff and also Honorable Anita Anand, the Minister of Defense, showing support. I think that one of the challenges that we've noticed at Dignity is a Dignity Network and sort of trying to understand how Canada is supporting LGBT communities is that Canada has a tradition of recently supporting organizations in Ukraine. Both of you mentioned support from Canadian Embassy, but from what we can see is that the embassy had moved and it reopened, but a lot of that financial support actually had stopped since the war started. And it's hard to understand or to see how much of Canada's humanitarian aid commitment. So Canada, if you don't know, Canada committed about $250 million of aid to Ukraine. And trying to understand, trying to see how much of that actually is getting to LGBTQ organizations that actually were funded, that were getting some support from the embassy. So it's actually a big concern of ours. And I'll just say it was great to hear Minister Anand's in statement about, I think, $6 million going to UNHCR to support refugees, which is very important. And then we don't know how much of that money actually goes to LGBTQ refugees. I think our interest is those organizations on the front line, such as LIGA, such as KyivPride, are they getting support from Canada? Do you know?
Directly, no, as far as I'm aware. I've asked around and I've not seen evidence of that. One of the other things that happens is with all of this humanitarian aid that's going into distribution centers or distribution organizations, they in turn are distributing it to organizations that are on a list. And LGBTQ organizations typically are not on that list. And so access to both humanitarian aid as well as to directly to funds has so far been extremely challenging for the LGBT community. Have you got any thoughts on that, Andrii?
Well, as I mentioned before, our organization has worked with Canadian Embassy before. Canadian Embassy has not just provided financial support to support the community in Ukraine, but also set up different meetings, organize different events, and participating in different events, stating about different issues, like stating their own opinion. And even LIGA works with Canadian government in general through the EGAL organization, and that's the project which is still funded for the police officers and tolerance and LGBT community. But since the war started, we didn't get any support from the Canadian embassy in Ukraine. And recently, LIGA has reached out to the embassy, inviting them to the event, which is focusing on the issues which Lenny mentioned in his video about the hate crimes targeting the LGBT community, about other violations and discrimination. And what the embassy representative replied to LIGA is that they are not fully not in full capacity right now to take the full participation in the event. So they basically answered that they will try to get involved as in as much capacity as they can at the moment because of the war.
Yeah, I mean, queer organizations, LGBTQ organizations are on the front line. They're connected to LGBTQ communities who are particularly impacted both before the war and then also during. So to me, it would be it's something that we need to, I think we need to really, for everybody watching this, I mean, I think one of the things that we should all be doing is that we should be calling our members of parliament and we should be asking the question, how is Canada supporting LGBT communities in Ukraine right now? I mean, Canada says it supports these communities, and it has in the past. Canada says it is supporting Ukraine with military and humanitarian aid, but I do feel, from what I hear, I mean, it really strikes me when I see photographs of Lenny driving a truck around trying to get like donations from Germans, and we're not getting the kind of support I think that we could be getting from Canada for the organizations that we had said we were supporting.
Exactly. And you're right. I mean, Lenny drove 4,000 kilometers around Eastern Europe, Central Europe, working through Pride organizations again to load up with humanitarian aid and bring that back into Ukraine because of not having access to that aid from aid centers in the west of Ukraine. And I think that's a trend that we've seen across all LGBT organizations that I'm aware of. We need more direct support to those organizations because they are doing great work. The other thing that Lenny briefly mentioned was we have a significant number of LGBT community members fighting in the territorial defense and in the Ukrainian army. And in many cases, they've foregone their true sense of identity in order to do that, right? But it's a huge leveler because at the end of the day, being present alongside fighting for their country, this is exactly what LGBT people are doing.
Do you know, before the war, were LGBT gay or trans people allowed to serve in the Ukrainian military?
Well, we have many cases when people from the LGBT community were actually in the army and they fought on the east of Ukraine. So there are a lot of cases, and many people after going from the army, they actually came out as members of the LGBT community. So we have many cases of that. We have also many cases right now that many people from the LGBT community are fighting for Ukrainian freedom at the moment as we speak. So there are lots of people who actually come out being in uniform and being actually on the fronts of the war right now.
Yeah, and I do know one of those Canadian embassy grants went to a group that was supporting LGBTI people in the Ukrainian military, actually, I think about 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So I'm wondering a little bit, Michelle, you're heading over to Europe soon. Do you want to just share a little bit about what you're going to be doing and what you're hoping to get out of that trip?
I would love to. As Lenny mentioned briefly, we can't have a KyivPride in Kyiv this year. That's just clearly not possible. It was originally planned for the end of June, and that's not going to happen. Warsaw Pride stepped up, and bearing in mind that Lenny's been in contact with prides right across Europe, Warsaw Pride were the first to step up and adopt KyivPride as the theme for Warsaw Pride this year. And I very gratefully have been sponsored to go and meet up with Lenny in Warsaw. We're going to attend Riga Pride because Riga in Latvia are doing the same thing. I'll have an opportunity to meet with the embassy in Riga. Warsaw Pride, and again, the Canadian embassy in Riga. And again in Warsaw for Warsaw Pride, I'll again meet with the Canadian embassy. And also in Cologne. Just recently, Berlin, Vienna, and Munich have also come on board. So all of those prides are focusing KyivPride as part of their event because KyivPride can't take place this year.
Andrii, have you thought much about, it's Pride season here in Toronto, have you thought much about what you may do here in Toronto over the next month in terms of Pride? And I do know that there is a fairly large contingent of Ukrainian Canadians getting ready to march at the front of the Toronto Pride Parade this year, which I think will be very powerful. But maybe you know about that. I just heard about it.
Well, I definitely want to take part in the march in the parade in Toronto. I was also thinking about volunteering at the Toronto Pride, but due to some trainings I need to undergo before applying for volunteering, I didn't actually have time to do that, so I had to skip that for this year. I also want to and plan to volunteer at some of the other LGBT organizations, probably here in Toronto, just to provide support to anyone who comes here, and maybe in some other organization which supports Ukrainian refugees and people who come to Canada from Ukraine right now. So these are basically my plans for now, at least.
Great to hear. I was actually just in Winnipeg on the weekend, which had a very large Ukrainian population, and it was Pride weekend, and there was a lot of Ukrainian flags in the Pride parade as well. So again, I'm hoping that we can turn some of this into action, right? That we can call our members of parliament, we can donate our own money, support LGBTQ organizations in Ukraine during a very tough time.
I think that's incredible, right? I just want to reflect just for a moment on what you've just shared. In 2014, when I first became aware, and I met up with KyivPride, one of the participants of the march in 2014 said to us, as a Canadian-Ukrainian, Ukrainian-Canadian, that he would have to make a choice in any particular setting, whether it's a work setting or a social setting. He had to make a choice. Was he going to show up as a gay person, a member of the LGBT community, or was he going to show up as a Ukrainian? Because at that time, he didn't feel like he could show up as both. And I think it's incredible to see what's happened since then. Right here in Canada, where Ukrainian LGBT are able to be themselves. And it's fantastic to hear that they'll be at the front of Toronto Pride, and I'm going to regret missing it. But,
You'll be with Lenny.
I'll be at Warsaw, for that weekend.
So I guess we're coming near to the end of our conversation, and you sort of mentioned a little bit about the tension on the war subsiding. What do you think? How can we keep Ukraine in our hearts and our minds over the coming? Like, what's your advice? I mean, obviously, both of you, your hearts and your mind. But what for those of us there's so many things in the news and so many things that that are coming at us, and I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on? And do you have any final thoughts for the audience, for anybody watching this online, about how we keep Ukraine in our hearts?
Ukraine may seem like it's a long way away. It's out there in Eastern Europe. We still hear in the West of people referring to it as the Ukraine. It's not the Ukraine, it simply is Ukraine, the country. It is fighting not only for its own territorial land and for its own sovereignty, it's fighting for freedom and democracy. And it really is the front line for Eastern Europe. And any of those states in Central and Eastern Europe that are getting anything close to the Russian border are very vested in the right outcome and the right result here, which is for Ukraine to restore its sovereignty over the occupied territories, including Crimea and the whole of Donbass. And we need to do that not just for Ukraine. We need to do that to preserve democracy and to preserve freedom. And everyone in the world needs to see that happen, I believe, against the world's second superpower. With any leniency is just going to open up the door to more aggression in the future.
I only want to say, stand with Ukraine and send your prayers for Ukrainian people, for them to be safe and unharmed.
And as LGBT community, please donate directly, either to KyivPride.org or to LIGA, and donate directly to the LGBT organizations that are working in the field. Yeah, for sure.
And I will say, call your member of parliament, ask them to please make sure that some of Canada's $250 million of humanitarian aid is actually getting directly to LGBTIQ organizations. Our hope is that our target, we're trying to aim for 0.3%, which would be about $750,000, which would make a huge impact on those organizations. So with that, I am going to turn it back to our host. Thank you very much for your wise words, and all the best in 2SL LIGA with Lenny. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having us.
So as a queer activist here in the Halton region, particularly in Oakville, like I am in awe and so jealous of the work that you're doing. It's so important, and I'm really impressed, and I think that people that are going to see this are going to be impressed with the work. It's such an important thing that you're doing, obviously. I want to say thank you, first of all, for being here and agreeing to do this. Andrii, it's a great pleasure to get to know you over email, and also the first time I saw you, you were on a Zoom call with a discussion like this, and I was really glad that we were able to connect and get you here. I know that you tried to have some time in Oakville today and maybe sometime tomorrow with you and your family, so welcome to Oakville, and we're glad that you're safe, and thank you so much for the work that you do. Michelle and I worked together for many years here in Halton, doing queer and trans work in education and human rights, and I miss you so much. It's been like 5 years since I've seen you, so thank you for coming tonight. And Doug, aside from your fabulous socks, the work that you're doing is pretty amazing too, and I loved having conversations with you over the last month about sort of finding that government support and from Canada, and that's so important. And then I think we have some attention by a couple of our local politicians, which is great. And I hope we can continue that conversation and facilitate that. A fun fact about Doug and I, about 20 years ago, Doug was involved with an agency that funded some of our Halton Pride events. So that's when I first met you, and now we were children, yeah. So I want to thank you all very much. And we will have on this video, but also on the Oakville Public Library website, there is a Support Ukraine tab where you can go, and it will give you direct links to organizations such as the ones that we were talking about today, where you can donate and get money and support directly to those organizations. Thank you so much. I love all three of you, and you're going to get big hugs from me. Thank you, everybody, for attending and having a great time in our Community Conversations series. Thank you.